Okay, all right, so time to go. Excellent. Right. So we're going to have, occasionally we'll have some fun little class projects, just little things we'll do in class, around voting and estimating and so on, right? So today, I have this piece about power law size distributions, so we'll see what these things are. So that's going to be today's lecture. It's going to be all about a particular type of scaling that is ubiquitous. You see it all over the place in the real world. As I'll say, from earthquakes to wealth to all sorts of things. It's the statistics of surprise, and often very bad surprise, right? Well, things go terribly wrong when you think everything is good. Financial system one day, no financial system the next day. So we'll talk about that, and it's going to be a bit of a thread through the whole course, so I'm going to give you a number of assignment questions as we go through, because they are very difficult things to understand. Our intuition for them is pretty awful. Hopefully we'll develop some intuition, but generally speaking, quite dismal. So, so I'll give you the definition of what I'm talking about here. There's power law sizes, so the distribution of sizes of things. So earthquake sizes, for example, right, so it's measured in energy, if you like, or wealth, of course, measured in dollars and so on. So sizes of things, right? It could be the number of times a word appears in a book. It's another kind of size we might think of. Now we'll connect this to Zipf's law. I mentioned Zipf the other day, so we have this nice thread back into the 30s and 40s, the 1930s and 40s of work there, trying to understand these really just observing these distributions for the first time, coming to grips with it. The 1800s we had all this stuff about Gaussians, and I'll mention them. And it's an amazing bit of amazing phenomenon of the natural world that Gaussians appear over and over, and we have a beautiful description of them. It was an incredible moment when we worked that stuff out. But they are the statistics of complete boredom, all right? Which is not the aim of this course. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple of questions. So I like to point out to myself, it took me a long time to realize this. Economics is completely confusing to me. It's just insane. I mean, going through college, I could never understand what my friends in business were doing. Money is belief, right? Credit cards, I mean, it's credit. Credit is belief, right? Credibility. So, and I sort of recently realized that American money in particular encodes that need for belief spectacularly, because it's sort of famously monopoly money to look at, right? I mean, Australia, in particular, where I'm from, and recently in Switzerland, and they have ornate money. It looks like something, right? It really feels like something. So, I think this is great. The little paper stuff. It tells you, it encodes what's going on. This is belief. It's belief. It's all in our heads. All right. So there's a couple of questions then about wealth distribution. Right? So we know there's incredibly wealthy people, some incredibly poor people. We have a sense of that range. So I'm going to hand around this, let's see if we can do two things at once. I want you guys to actually just say your names and your, if you're graduate, undergraduate, and what area you're from. So we'll go around and do that as well. That's always fun for you guys. But I think we should do that. Often we have people from quite different areas. I don't know if that's true. I haven't quite looked through the list and figured that out, but I think it should be true. So here are your jobs. I want you to estimate, and this is an independent thing. I want you to write it down first, and then when the piece of paper comes down, you just transcribe what you've written down. There's no looking at what anyone else has done, right? This is wisdom of the crowds type stuff. We want you to act. I want you to act independently. So, I want you to estimate two things. One is the percentage of wealth owned by individuals when grouped into quintiles. So, order everyone from perhaps it's Bill Gates at the top down to the person at the end, right? So we take them in terms of their wealth. So, and we look at it in terms of quintiles, which is a bit of an odd thing to think about, and that's purposeful. So that you take the top 20%, what fraction of all wealth do they own? Right, so the limits would be, you could say the limits would be, you're going to get 5 columns, so the limits could be, so there's a top 20, and then the second, third, fourth, and fifth. And so the extremes would be this, 100, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? This is the, when the credit card companies win, this is modern day serfdom, right? We're in trouble, there's a king, and everyone else is messing around in the in the fields looking for filth to eat and so on, right? You know, Monty Python type stuff. A lovely bit of dirt. Okay, and this is the opposite extreme. Right? You can't. This is the other extreme where everyone has the same amount, and this is something people dream up and have rebellions about. But it's you know, this is, so they're the two extremes, and I'm not saying you should choose them at all. But I want you to choose what you think the real distribution is in the U.S. now. And then, you know, so this is more of a personal thing. I don't want you to put your names or anything, but, you know, I'll tally this up later on and I'll show you what you guys put collectively on Tuesday, what you think it should be. Right, so no names, so you can, so what do you ideally, you know, you can have any belief or whatever you like with it. So write down, you need 5 numbers. One is what you think it is, and one is what you think it should be. That's good. So my job is to help you go out and do great things in areas outside of math. So I think that's what I'm going to give you that as a suggestion. All right. Cool. All right. That's good. So is that sheet of paper is going around? Yes. So we have a sense of who we are. All right. We have the dangerous economist. It's always good. All right. So let's look. So this is some fantastic work done by Mike Norton, who's at the Harvard Business School. And he's really, so I met him a few years ago, really good guy, did psychology, computer science and psychology at Princeton. And he's really one of the, it's kind of funny, he's really one of the first people who does serious research at the Harvard Business School, that really sort of, you know, teaching, make money out of people, kind of business for a long time. They have at some point they certainly had the 3rd largest endowment. It was Harvard, Princeton or Stanford or something, and then Harvard Business School. And everything is paid with gold. It's kind of funny. Anyway, so he's a good fella, and he and Arley, you might know Dan. That says his name actually, Dan Arley. So you might know his stuff. He's written some popular books. I think it's Predictably Irrational is one of them.
Is that Duke, right?
Is that right?
Is that Duke?
He's at Duke. That's exactly right. Yeah, I'm going to say it in a funny way, but yeah, exactly. Yes. Right. So yeah, saying, you know, behavioral economics, right? Getting into this fact that humans aren't actually ideal units of rationality. All right, so this is, so they ran a study and they ran a survey, and of course they looked at real data as well. So this is, so let's explain it. So here are our quintiles. This is the actual distribution at some point in the last few years. So the top 20% own about 85% of the wealth. The next 20% have, looks like about 10. So that's the second quintile. The 3rd quintile is here, and they own about 3%. And the 4th and 5th quintiles don't come up on this screen. They're too small. They own less than 1% total. So you may, well, we've got the 80-20 rule. People like to use that one a lot, right? Which is this idea that 80% own 20%, 20 own 80. It's a much more nuanced story than that, of course. It's a whole distribution, but this is one way of getting it. So this is then the estimated, you know, based on the sample, and you can look at this paper, which is here. It's nicely done. It's what people in their survey estimated, right? So they got a reasonable, that more than half of the wealth was, so it's an average score, more than half of the wealth was owned by the top quintile. But you can see, this is what we're scrunching across here. So there's a belief that the bottom 20, it's kind of a guess that the bottom 20, you know, own something. And you know, these guys collectively own about 10% here. Right? The bottom 40 would have 10%. Really, it's about, you know, rounding off, it's 0. And then this is ridiculous, right? This is the ideal estimate. This is what people thought. I don't know what all you young, like nice, happy people might think, although you're mathematicians and engineers. A brutal idea is what it should be, but this is, we'll see what comes out. No changing, all right, if you're still building this thing. So it's much more egalitarian, right? It's ridiculous. It's the top 30. I mean, it's not even clear to me that a natural system could produce this. As we'll see as we go through, there are lots of, you know, growth mechanisms in the world that tend to produce these types of incredibly skewed distribution. All right, so that's one thing. And then they did this extra piece, and I'm sorry this doesn't render so well, but this is the actual at the top. And then they've broken people down as far as their estimates go and then their ideal scores go as a function of demographics. Right, so let's look at this. So these are people earning less than 50K, 50 to 100, greater than 100. So you see, it kind of makes sense, right? The trends are all the same. So if you're earning, people, as you increase your wealth, personal wealth, there's more of a skew this way, at least for that top part. So there's a little trend there. This is, so they had information on whether people voted for Bush or Kerry in the 2004 election. So that's just a way of getting at political belief in a simple way. And so you see there's a little skew towards, is that right? So that's actually going, I mean, they're all basically the same is the point. I think that skew is actually, yeah, it's not what I thought. All right, so that skew is actually, the Kerry voters think there's more, it's more skewed. And then you have women and men having but all very, very similar. And then the ideal ones, and this is kind of the shocking ones, the ideal ones are all this kind of absurd, beyond Scandinavia kind of equality. I mean, I'm sure, the Norwegians are all very happy because they're sitting on a pile of oil, but I don't think it's quite like that. I'm sure it's really not. They're the most, I believe that's right, Scandinavia is the most equal story in the world. And I'm not at all saying this is good or bad, any of these things. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to give you a nice piece of work that gets at this kind of what we estimate. I mean, estimates are incredibly far off the real world, and of course what we think it should be ideal. It's a nice study. All right, so we'll see how you guys do. All right, I'll show you some. I'll make some figures up, and I'll show you on Tuesday. That's the other thing I should say. So what I'm trying to do, at least for the start of this semester, is have kind of fundamental stuff on the Tuesday, and then we'll have some nitty-gritty things on the Thursday, as you can go home and enjoy yourself with some assignment questions, all right? A little bit of math, which I guess you guys will love. So, all right, so this is this typical, so we see these kinds of what we call power law size distributions. Get into exactly what we mean by that. Some people just say power law distributions, but it's a bit of a mouthful, but power law size distributions, right? So the probability that the size is equal to x is decaying as x is some power gamma. And there's a lot in this gamma. There's an enormous amount in this gamma. And these distributions appear all over the place. Physicists love them because they found them popping out of everything. And they have beautiful stories for why those power laws appear, and more of their beautiful stories for why these gammas appear. It's magnets or all sorts of things. But we see them in all sorts of phenomena outside of kind of hardcore, old school physics. So that gives physicists hope, but they usually run into some trouble. So see if you do this, just sketch the function, sketch this function. There you go. Just a little bit, I mean, just whatever. I mean, I'm just sketching this on an x-axis, that's a proof of x, just scribble one down. Make x go from, right, so it's not going to be 0, a bit above 0 to 10,000 or something. Scribble down. All right, so think about that. So typically what we see in these kinds of real-world distributions is there's a minimum cutoff, what we'll call a cutoff, and a maximum cutoff. And that'll be something to do with the problem itself, right? The real-world problem itself. If we're talking about, wealth, there's sort of a limit to how much someone can have based on the current financial systems, how much money there is in the world, how much belief there is in the world. If you're talking about earthquakes, there's a limit to the size of earthquakes based on the thickness of the Earth's crust and so on, right? So there's an upper scale. You might think of a lower scale there based on our instruments, how much we can measure, and in some sense care about. So there's typically some sort of cutoff, and what we'll talk about is there's a scaling regime. There's a regime, some values of x between what we call min and max, and of course this x's will turn into whatever we're talking about, the whole science. That this scaling persists over. And I will say this, maybe not in these things, that usually you want 3 orders of magnitude. Then you start to think, this is a decent amount of scale. Right? It's a very tricky business measuring, validating these kinds of functions because they are nasty things. Sampling is messy, and I'll show you how that works you'll see that in your assignments. You'll see how things are different. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. He interjected ridiculously. All right, so what we love to do with these things is we take logs of these guys, so we take a log of this expression, and this little curly guy means it's kind of approximately behaving like this over some region. So roughly, we'll take a log of both sides, all right? So we have log of p on the left-hand side, and we have c times x to the minus gamma, so we get the logs spread out to a sum, and we have a power here, so that pops down. Right, so the x to the minus gamma pops down. In many ways, logarithm space is the space to be thinking about things, and it's the way our brains work when it comes to sound and all sorts of, there's just a lot of reasons for music, of course, it's like that. But we tend to, there's some evidence because we learn to count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we drill that into our heads that we sort of mess ourselves up with. I'll point to that later on. We kind of have an intuition for logarithmic stuff when we're starting out, and then we say, no, you have some numbers. All right. And we use base 10 because we are good, decent people, all right? Anyone running around with a natural logarithm in this area, so I know we've got some mathematicians floating around, and you love those things, but it's kind of bad. So this is just, we have the 10 digits, and that's an accident of history sort of thing, but that's where we are. Engineers use this all the time, decibels and so on, right? Orders of, and we code it orders of magnitude, right? Powers of 10. So that's what we talk about. It's always in base 10. That's just goodness. Okay. Right, so that's done. Now we do anything else. All right, good. Something else that's just not there. Okay, we'll have to get to that. So usually it's only the tail that matters, actually, right? So often, I talked about a cutoff at either end. It's possible there's no upper cutoff, and you just have a nice tail. So this is, the probability is behaving like this as x to the minus gamma. So I don't know how you go sketch your things, but let's say this is going to be completely wrong, but it'd be, maybe you have something like this, and this is x to the minus gamma here. This is completely wrong. But it's very, it helps me prove a point. Okay, so this is non-scaling here, right? There's something else going on here. There's some nice regime in here, and it continues out, it keeps going. That's typical. So we talk about distributions having parallel tails, right? Happens a lot. And that will matter, because this is where if say x is earthquake size, right? The ones you care about are the ones out on the tail. They're the big ones. Like a tsunami size or wealth size. I'm not sure if I said this again, but one comparison to make it, I will repeat this, but think about heights of people. Okay, so think about heights of people. So if you take everyone's height in the US, and then you have them in a big box, all these heights, all these numbers, and you pull one out, and then you pull a few more out, and you start to plot that distribution, you'll get a nice Gaussian. Right? It'll be some sort of Gaussian type thing. And you'll never find anyone who's 100 foot tall, or 1,000 foot tall, or 10,000 feet tall. But if you do this with wealth, then most people, as we saw, you will get very simple. You put everyone's wealth into your box, and you start pulling out these numbers. Most of the time you get little amounts, small amounts, and it depends on this gamma. It depends on this exponent, what we call the exponent. This guy will depend on this, exactly in detail what I'm saying, but basically you get out a lot of little people, you do it for a long time, now you get someone who maybe earns $100,000 a year, and you do it for 10 times as long, you get someone who earns $1 million, and then you do it for 10 times as long, you get someone who earns $10 million. Now and then you get, incredibly rarely, you will get Bill Gates. But it's possible. It's possible. It's possible to get someone who's fantastically wealthy. So they're very different distributions. Very real, both of them are very real and important. So parallel, so people are, it's really the tail that matters, generally speaking. Analytically and functionally, and we'll talk about that as being a parallel size distribution. People also say fat-tailed distributions, the distribution is fat-tailed or heavy-tailed. Possibly not the most PC language, but I guess they don't say obese, but maybe this was made up before that was really an issue. All right. Yes, you will see this quite a lot. Because it's not always a parallel. So that's a horrible, horrible thing. It's not always a parallel. There are these things called normals, Libel distributions, which are kind of failure distribution, product of Sweden. And these are connected exponential distributions as well, a very nice way. But you see, and there are many others, that your system really could be exhibiting. And you need a different mechanism, a different understanding to figure out why your system is showing these distributions. This is, say, a parallel. There is, and I'm happy to say there's an obsession with these guys. Everything is a parallel, right? Everything is a parallel. There's a paper in Nature a few years ago that showed the number of sexual contacts that people have called a parallel, and therefore things spread like crazy, but it's a disease thing. It's pretty much refuted as a... also came out of Sweden, which is people get carried away about them. They'll find them, anyway. And I'll try to explain why you should or shouldn't find them. How to behave well. So you'll see things that have discrete sizes as well, right? It's not just continuous sizes. So word frequency, so by that I mean you open a book, so you open Moby Dick, and you read the first 30 pages, and it's incredibly boring, and you have to put it down and just acknowledge that it's a great work in the time, all right? But you don't need a vestibule described in 4 pages. Anyway, so it's an important book. But you count the number of times, you do something ridiculous. You count the number of times the appears, of appears, and appears, and you just, what's language about, right? How many times does harpoon appear? And there's some pretty exotic words in Moby Dick, which is fun. It's kind of if you look up these word distributions on Wikipedia, you'll find Moby Dick as kind of the example. It's one that people love to pull out. I've had students work on it. Very rich. So it turns out, for example, so again, this inequality thing, the, of, and, a, so about 6 words that account for 20% of all words in most English text, large enough text. So 20% of all words will be the, of. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5% will be the. And journalists actually, my wife's journalist, so journalists get paid by the word, actually, which is kind of a funny, I mean, depending on, some jobs, some freelancers will be paid by the word, so it's always been sort of an amusing thing to me that many of those words will be very, very simple little words, but how do you get it? About 150 words will account for half of all the words. 150 unique words will account for half of all the words that you see, between 100 and 200. We do a lot with that, right? Very clever thing. So node degree networks, so that could be the number, so networks is a huge topic we'll get to later on. So it could be the number of friends you have, and that's a difficult thing to quantify. A bunch of Facebook might like to tell you that, the strength of friendship, all sorts of things. Number of hyperlinks, that might be more clear, certainly clear in the early days of the web. You can find out how many pages actually link straight into a page, or certainly how many links were going out. So these are integer numbers, is what I'm trying to say, as I ramble a bit. Number of citations for articles, court decisions, some very interesting work on Supreme Court decisions, right? So you can see which is a decision or a case which draws on these ones and is then drawn on later on by these other ones. So you can think about, well, in this whole ecology of decisions, which ones are the most important? And so what we've done is move beyond, because we can quantify these things, we've moved beyond saying the most important person is the one with the most friends, right? Or the most important page is the one with the most hyperlinks. We've started to see, this is how Google works, for example. We've started to figure out that we could look at the system and tell a better story of, say, importance or value and so on, based on where something is in its much, much larger context. So data, big deal. So we see the same thing again, right? So we have that same distribution. It's going to be decaying as power law, but these are integers. And we can do the same sorts of things, right? You have a discrete sum perhaps involved in some of your analysis. We turn it into an integral. We like those things. We can pretend the world is continuous when it isn't. Okay. And so there are some issues that will fail when k equals 0. And so there are some tweaks that people do, and usually it's just the tail again. All right, so here's an example for words. It's a Brown corpus. It's an English corpus. There's a link to it on Wikipedia. It's a somewhat famous one in linguistics. It's about 1 million words. Of course, we have corpora now that are much bigger and cover many different areas. Interesting thing about languages is no particular, say for any language in particular, but say English, there's no universal sort of list of words by their importance, right? You can just say within a particular area, here's the list of words ordered by frequency. So you can say Moby Dick, or you can say all of the New York Times, or perhaps particular years. You can say Twitter. You can say, all right, we can then focus in or out of different regions where people are tweeting. Very different types of words being used. There's no way you can sort of add Twitter to the New York Times, right? They're just completely different ologies of words. So you sort of have to just say, okay, this is what language is like here. This is what it's like here. This is sort of a melange of all sorts of things. So it's having said that, this is what they did here. They took written texts, spoken ones, all sorts of things. Just smushed it all together. So again, this is the, of, and, to, taking up a lot of space. This is all adding up to 100%. This is further out in the, we're down to 0.005%. It's quite small. You see lots of good words. These are all good words. Yeah. You certainly get out to 15 for some reason, struggling out there. You say a very nice thing with the numbers, actually. If you have numbers in here, 0, so 1, 2, 3, we'll get to that later on. 1, 2, 3, 4. The way they appear is quite special. It's called benefits law. Again, a Power story. So you see good stuff. You usually see good stuff out to say 30 or 40,000 words, and then things start to go wrong. There's spelling mistakes and also just gibberish. This is a beautiful visualization of this. It's from Jonathan Harris, who connects to a lot of the work we've done on happiness. We had him here as a kind of a visiting artist. He's a brilliant guy. He's won a lot of awards for all of his stuff online. He's kind of a mixture of scientist kind of artist guy. Let's see. Can I click on that? Not exploded. Maybe. Yes. Sad little thing. So it's a fun thing to play with, right? So the, of, and you can check out. You can look for words. So here's the distribution. Right, going right out. It's about 100,000 words. So let's see what's it. This could go wrong, of course. Resplendent. Oh, these are good words. These are great words. That's a good word. Waterers. See, it's getting a little. We're struggling a little bit out here. Big fin. Yeah, things are going wrong. Sauerkraut. Or misspelling. This should be good. Right, it's not madness. So there's 43,000. There you go. Aplenty is a great word. It's a great word. Drooling. They live there, and these words that they have a space. So it's a beautiful. And he was just looking at this what we call we'll come call zip distributions. Right? A few people notice this, but Ziff is the guy who's really attributed with noticing it, and this whole story is attached to him. Yeah, they do it. Nice. So that's beautifully done. You can find words, of course. Oh, so the other thing he did with this, and I'm not going to show you, is he looked at the words people search for. And that's, I probably don't need to say anymore. Okay, so that was interesting too. People are very interesting. Much more interesting than electrons. Okay, so, all right, let's think about what are these distributions like. So he basically creates these art installations almost that are on the web. They're fantastic, really beautiful. And some crazy stuff. He went to a whale hunt in Alaska, in northern Alaska, where he hooked up a camera and took a photo every 5 minutes. So he has this, when he was asleep, everything. And so he has this kind of big, spread out version of it. You can see colors change to black to unfortunately red, but lots of things. Smart. Pretty crazy. Okay, so this is a Gaussian distribution. Good old Gaussian distribution. Look at that. It's like a droopy stuff. That's very, very boring thing. So, and this is just on a normal scale. Here it is on if we put on a log scale. And I've sat down here around the mean of 10, so we can take the log of this in a meaningful way. That's what happens to that thing. So it doesn't, well, I'll show you what these skewed distributions look like, these heavy tail distributions look like in general. But this is where we are with Gauss. It's fantastic things, beautiful formula, around lots of. Okay, so this is, so I got you to sketch this thing before, it should look like this. On a linear scale, this is what these parallel distributions look like. They just go and then flat. So you look at this thing and you think, you know, this is it's always going to be little guys, and it's true. Love little guys, but there's a lot actually sitting out here. There's actually some stuff here, and if you do a little integral, you get some stuff, and you get some probability of something happening out here. It's not obvious at all. This is for the Brown corpus. So this is if you take the log, and we talked about that as being a good thing to do. So it's linear in log space. Maybe I didn't use it. So we've got P of x, scan like C, x to the minus gamma, then log 10, log of course of anything, but so this is just a constant, right? So this is a constant, and then we have minus gamma log 10 of x. So this is the slope of the curve, of the linear slope. Wise over run business. And so this guy, the log of the probability is a linear function of the log of the size. So you see that. So size in this case is again the way it was frequency of you could normalize in different ways, but it's the frequency of usage. So this is the log 10 of maybe it was 5 or 6%. Correct. Yes. Good. So you see another feature of these things you'll find is you get this starts to break up. Right? These guys hang around here. There's only one word that appears as frequently as V does. Right? It's a big gap to the next one. And then you start to get guys that. So this is frequency of occurrence here is 1. Right? This is 1 along here. This is log 10 of 1. It's 0. So log 10 of 2 is this value. Log 10 of 3 is this value. Log 10 of 4 is this value. Right? Log scales are very odd things to think about. You know? So you have to adjust a little bit. Right? So it's 1, 3, 10. Those things are equally spaced. You know, if you have a log scale in front of you, you have to guess what that value is. We tend to make a mess of it. Until you practice, you have to practice. So does that make sense? This is 0, right? Log 10 of 1 is 0. So these guys are only apparent once. It's a corpus of finite size. These guys are apparent twice. So now we have frequencies where we see more than one word inhabiting that niche, if you like. And now down here we'll see words that, so this should be the words that appear once. So another very odd feature of this is that, and we'll get to this story much later on with zip, is that there are many, many words that appear once, and typically it's about half of the words in a text that appear once. Right? And the hapax legomenon, we even have a ridiculous Greek term for that, which means a word or a term that appears once in a written body of work. And this is sort of a beautiful idea that appears once in a whole language. Language is occurrence, and sort of a thing that Paul Hayes would write a whole short story about. And he may have, I'm not sure, but I think so. Right, so about half of them. Right. So these are, if you like, this is the king out here, and these are the peasants, right? So there are lots of peasants with one little bit of dirt. So collectively, though, they add up. Half of the individuals in whatever the size is. So half of the earthquakes are very, very small, but if they can be combined in some way, they add weight. Right? So if all these rare words can be combined in some way, they, as a group, are quite large. So that's another thing to think about. Individually, they're all, a word that appears once doesn't have a lot of power, but collectively, all those words that appear once potentially have a lot. Trying to get a feel for this madness. All right. So, as I've sort of showed you here, it gets a little messy. The sort of thing we want to do is measure the exponent here. Right? We want to fit this with linear regression, and we'd say, okay, let's run a line through this thing and find the best fit, and we'll call that our gamma, minus gamma. Right? But things are going to go wrong out here. And so we have to, so this is where it's an awful business that's been going for many years. People doing all sorts of bad things, and statisticians getting upset, and everyone getting confused. But so one of the ways we try to cope with this is we look at what I'll use this notation, the exceedance probability. So this is the number of words, in this case, the number of words that appear with at least a frequency q the same. Right. So we'll connect these things. So there's only one word out here, and it's the that appears at least this many times. And then there are two words that so it's the and of perhaps that appear this many times. So that's a 2, and this is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the logs of those scores. So it's going up. And what we've done here, we'll see, is we've integrated things, and integrated smooths things, and it's going to smooth the story here. And if we fit this, we're going to do better. But of course, it's not the original distribution, so we need to see how this guy connects to the previous one. And it connects in a very simple way, so it's nice. We're not going to absolutely do this. It goes on, but you might want to play with this. This is kind of, it's an interesting thing. So it capitalizes on the, words are just such a nice example to but it capitalizes on the fact that, I'm using that word, that the word frequencies follow these incredibly skewed distributions to try and, because you don't want to ask someone 100,000 words, do you know these words? Yes, unless you're trying to get them to confess to something. So you don't do that. You sample from it, right? So you have to sample from it in a clever way. And so what this does is in 2 steps, we're not going to do it. We'll do a little bit of it. Yeah. So the way it starts is you're given a bunch of words that are not too super hard, right? So there's like and thinking, and you just simply have to say, do you know what these words mean? So what we could do as a group is click through all these things. And so, do we know what these guys are down here? I mean, anyone? Does anyone know what these words are? Yeah? Opsimath? No? So we might miss a few at the end, collectively, right? All right. But based on how many you answered here, it will go out and ask you another set that are further out in the distribution. So if you don't answer many here, if you answer just a couple, it'll scale you back and try to ask you really a bunch of simple ones. If you answer all, if you say, you know all of these, then it'll push you further out in the distribution. So there's 2 stages. The next stage has a bunch of many more words, and it becomes quite to do as a group. But you might like to do this, kind of fun. So I got Jacques Bailey. Someone know Jacques Bailey? Professor Bailey. So he's in plastics here, and he's friends of the show. He's we live next to each other. Our kids play and do all sorts of crazy things with each other. But they ridiculous imagination. He's great. So he is the spelling bee guy, right? He is the, I don't know if you know this, but UVM has the guy who asks the questions at the spelling bee every year, right? And he won it in 1981 or 82 with a Lucid rate, which means to study into the night, has something to do with oil, and burning the midnight oil, when he was very young. And so he's on a Killer on the Bee, that movie, they put him in there. So he's the one who asks a very, very nice way, makes everyone feel happy. And, So I got him to do this, and I think he got 42 or 3,000 as a vote, estimated by this. He also has a game that if you're in any of these classes and you can give him a word that he can't spell, you automatically get an A. Done. Alright, so see if you can beat 42,000 with that cheat. Right, so that was a clever leader. It was a nice one. Alright, so I'll show you a few others. I've talked about earthquakes. This is the famous Gutenberg-Richter law. Right, this is bad. Badness happens out here. You don't want to be down here. Alright, you want your little seismology to be saying things that happen here. That's okay. Of course, the one that happened on the East Coast was about, I don't know where it was here. It knocked over a few lawn chairs or something like that. But it caused an incredible meteor outcry. We saw it on Twitter. We saw this just massive explosion. concern. Anyway, that was last year. So, beautiful parallel, but awful. Beautiful but awful parallel. And again, on this, so these log scales, again, if we put on a linear scale, we just nothing. Right? Very weird, really strange, unsettling things. The log thing makes you kind of feel like there's too much here, but it's where we need to work. This is taken from, I know that's how to say it, it's taken from a paper. This is Per Bach, who's a very famous character in complex systems. He passed away a number of years ago at a young age, but he, incredibly cantankerous physicist who thought he knew everything. So, not a really nice guy, but he had kind of like white line fever. I don't know if you say that, but that's in sporting terms. So if you cross the white line, you become an animal. They're quite nice off the field, right? So it's called white line fever. He kind of had that in the academic sense. In colloquia or conferences, he would just go berserk on people. You know, not a lot of game playful, but really nice guy. Outside, lovely fellow. And he has his book was How Nature Works. Thanks a lot. So it didn't explain everything, but we'll come back to him later on. Self-organized criticality is his thing, which sounds great, but it is a little has some issues. Okay, unfortunately there is two papers. One is in, I think, Physical Review Letters, the other one is in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, which is an esteemed place to put things. And it's a good place to put things if you're invited or if you're a member of the National Academy of Sciences, right? There's a joke. So PNAS stands for Probably Not Accepted at Science, or Post-Nature and Science. So it's always had a bit of a ding for it in that sense. And if you know some of the national academies, they can help shepherd the thing in. All right. They basically published the same paper in two different places. So that was very unfortunate. And then had to say, oh, we didn't understand. Anyway, but it is that. It's always good when academics do things like this. All right. So this is from 2 years ago now, the tsunami in Japan. This is from the New York Times. So what's the most surprising thing is how misleading history can be. Well, I want to talk about this about predictability. In the past 300 years, no earthquake nearly that large, so there's nothing close to what had struck Japan in that area. And that in turn led to assumptions about how large a tsunami might be. So there are in fact stones that have been put into the ground that said, do not build past this point. And they're from the 1500s or the 1600s, because that's when everything had been demolished up to that point. So that, based on history, that was a reasonable thing to do. It got wiped out up to here, you put a stone, and you make it a really good stone, and you say, don't build past, like this stone is not going away, read it, and of course people eventually, generations go by, the stone has got moss on it, I mean there's nothing wrong, and then there are nice trees, and so you build, right? But that's the nature of phenomena that have these kinds of distributions. You're hearing it coded in what's like the 100-year flood, which sometimes happens every 10 years when things change, right? Or the 1,000-year flood. People will frame it in that way. And that's not a bad frame. So it did him a great disservice. It's not the first time the earthquake potential of the fault has been underestimated, right? And of course the terrible tsunami in the Indian Ocean, which just really never thought to be possible, actually. It's the Pacific is the place where tsunamis have been such a big concern and measured. But that was an unbelievable catastrophe. So we're in trouble here because we have a couple of things going against us, apart from just latent stupidity as human beings. But there's we're not very good with probability. Right? We're just not very good. We can get really messed up. I mean, witness in Las Vegas, right? Voluntary tax. People seem quite happy to posit it. There's even good stuff. This happened about 10 years ago where you just put your credit card in and it actually just runs automatically. So you can watch the thing go up and down. That's appealing to people, right? You're not even pushing. I mean, there used to be a thing you had to pull, which in Australia called a one-arm bandit. And then you had to push a button, so it's electronic, you push a button, and then it's just push one button. Just watch. We'll do some stuff with random walks because they're kind of randomness is everywhere, and random walks have some nice stuff about scaling. But that's basically what's happening. It's a little random walk and then zero. So we have trouble with these things, probability and logarithmic scales. And I mentioned this before. There's a nice, this is something to do, of course, when you have no time, you have lots of time to do things, right? So there's a piece from Radiolab from a few years ago. Radiolab is a bit up and down. It's a science thing, sponsored by the National Science Foundation and various other outfits. And one of the main guys has a MacArthur Genius Award now. But they can do some really beautiful things. And I'll reference them a couple of times. But they have a piece in here in this program on numbers is something of this is a section on logarithms and how it's a bit about this, how we count, how we're good at counting, we forgot the counting thing. And there's a suggestion that infants can kind of get the 1, 3, 10 thing, and some societies where they really don't have counting, like 1, 2 many, there's more of a sense of logarithm built into the section of number. Very interesting. These are fun things to look at. I want to mention this because if you've been in my other classes, you may have seen them. But the Monty Hall problem, you should look at that. That's a famous one, right? So that's the shell game. Right, so I'll just tell you quickly, if you haven't heard of it, it's a classic 3-card Monty thing. So we'll make it a shell game. So you have 3 shells, there's something good under one of the shells, and you're shuffling around, you've got a fava bean or something. So you're shuffling around, that's what we want, the fava bean. And so you guess, right? So I stop shuffling, you guess, and you say it's this one, and then I lift up one of the others and say it's not under this one, do you want to change? Right? And that's the game. And then the question is, should you change? Right? So if you haven't seen that one, you should think about that. And you should think about this one. I have this little set of what I call asides floating around, where I just add some extra madness, build this thing. So here's a couple of quick questions. Probability. So a parent has 2 children. Right? So imagine this. A parent has 2 children. So imagine that girls and boys are born with equal probability, 1.5. Fair enough, and we're just sampling randomly from the population. So what's the probability that both children are girls? 25. Okay, think about it in your head, so 25. Okay. Good? Right? Score. Because you have go, boy, go, boy, boy. Right? So, so a parent has 2 children, and we know one of them is a girl. One of them is a girl. So what's the chance that they're both girls now? Okay, it's a third. Good. So it's a quarter, this is a third. The right things. So here's another question. So we have a parent who has 2 children, and we know one of them is a girl born on a Tuesday. What's the probability that they're both girls? What do you want to say? I mean, what's the thing that comes into your brain? Nothing. Or, it could be nothing. It could be just like, or it could be, your brain could say something straight away. What do we think? So the question is, does Tuesday matter?
Doesn't seem like
do you think Tuesday matters? Okay, that's a good answer. So that's the intro. That's what you want, right? That would be a good story. We're storytellers. We're not very good with this stuff. It matters ridiculously. Okay, so we'll come back to that one because that's really bad. This is actually a relatively recently sort of framed question. I mean, we keep coming up with these things and being upset. The 3-card, the Monty Hall problem, someone famously got all sorts of statisticians, professors and so on upset because they're saying, no, blah, blah, blah. And they're all wrong. Right? All these people are wrong. Awful. So another one we have is, one of the girls is born on December 31st. What's probably that? You have 2 girls now. So there's another question. So go home and think about this. Question mark. Might not matter. I don't know. But it seems like the consensus fair enough was that Tuesday doesn't matter. And this shouldn't matter. It's just another day. It's a particular day of the year. So that should not matter. So if they don't matter, then we're back to a third, right? So there should be a third and a third. It's not. It's not. horrible. It's so horrible. It is painful. So a good exercise is to figure out what the right answer is, and also to figure out a good explanation that makes you feel good about it. Right? You can do it mathematically. That's okay. If you want one that appeals to our storytelling existence. All right, so I just want to unsettle you about that. I think that's good. Scare you a little bit. I was reflecting on it last night. I was thinking, makes you sick. All right, good. Good. So we're in trouble with these things because we have these logarithmic scales, which it's a bit of a struggle for us, a big struggle for us. So we have to work on this. This is taken from work by Mark Newman, and I'll link to it. This is he wrote this nice piece on power laws in general. I have to say that personally I've been working on these things forever. Measuring these slopes has just been this madness that we've all been involved in for a long, long time. And it's just going to be a big part of the course. It's a big part of the world, basically. So, the universe. So, lots of different things here, and it's a bit hard to see them. But, so there's an earthquake magnitude. This is a number of telephone calls received, and there's a particular structure to that. So, it's the number of calls received in a single day. So, it varies as a function of a single day for AT&T. So, the citations to papers. Right? So, the modal number of citations, I think classically for academic papers, where all these good things are put, all these great things that everyone wants to read for, I'm kidding, is 0. Right? So it could be 1, right? So the most common number of citations that you'll find. You pick out a random paper, a random journal paper, and you're going to look at how many times it's been cited, and you get 0 or 1. Especially if you take away the author citing himself. All right, that seems to have a kind of power law. So again, it's this runaway success stuff, and we'll come back to that later on. Especially in social success things, there's a rich gets richer. There's this building that happens in many systems. These are hits on the web. This is again word frequency. Number of times a book is sold. Again, super popular books. Lots of books that did not do so well. So this is going to work for music, all sorts of things. Crater diameter on the moon. Which is pretty silly. This is wealth. Frequency of names, right? There are a lot of Michaels in the US, and there is a club of Michaels. Which is just a weird human thing, right? There was a couple that got married because they had the same name. Gene and Jean. Their full names were the same, so they were just getting divorced. It was through Facebook. It's not you want to match up on a number of dimensions when you meet someone, and it's probably not enough. Okay, so population of city, another story. This is intensity of gamma rays. This has something to do with the Hulk. But anyway, okay, so these are some of the numbers, right? So they all look kind of the same, actually. Let's see. They're on the same. So these are on different axes. So this is a little bit naughty. They even have different things. This is log. Okay, it's magnitude. Fair enough. We're comparing very different things. But these slopes all kind of look the same. You might think they're all the same. But you have to look in detail here, right? Orders of magnitude here. There are 3 orders of magnitude here. This is pretty slim. It's not much. Right? It's a very different kind of axes going. Fine. So these are approximate. It actually is on the previous paper. Number of war deaths. This is a very famous bit of work by Richardson, who is a brilliant guy. Actually has a number of fluid mechanics named after him because he was a meteorologist as well. He basically foresaw the idea of having computers everywhere predicting the weather. But he also fought in the First World War. Well, he didn't fight. I think he was maybe in the ambulance division. It was terrible, of course, and he was a geek, so he came home and was very sad about it, but he looked at all the wars and came up with this power law distribution. Sizes of forest fires, at least a heavy tail. Right? So lots of tiny little ones, some enormous ones, and that we'll come back to that later on. And why do you sometimes get these massive collapses? Of course, power failures. Lots of tiny little ones, lots of, and then less, medium-sized ones. It's very hard to say this in one. We always go for this dichotomy of little ones and big ones, but they have them at all scales. But you see these different scalars. There's minus 2s here. I'll link you to this paper here. It's power laws, Pareto distributions, and zip. Am I doing very poorly? Okay. And then we have ranges of errors. So, big game in how to estimate these things well and be happy with it. So, different things. This is citation to papers, k to the minus 3. There's a minus 2 or minus 2. This is ridiculous. The gravitational force at a random point in the universe, which I don't know if you want to look that up, okay? It's a good little problem in some ways. And I guess if you're on Doctor Who, it would matter. F to the minus 5 half, so there's a 2.5 there. And the moon craters is d to the minus 3 pi. So there's some variation. But these numbers are, generally speaking, between 2 and 3. And that turns out to be a big deal. We'll find some that are, we'll find a very special one later on, which is 1.5. And that has a very, very special feature to it, but we'll come to that. I'll get back to 2 and 3. So you might have come across this guy, Nassim Taleb, who has made a lot of money by understanding these distributions. Basically losing money in most days of his investment career, but making an enormous amount when everything exploded completely. And so he wrote this book, The Black Swan, the impact of the highly improbable, right? So these things that just don't happen. So Hurricane Katrina was a good example in terms of insurance and so on. It was just not predicted to be. The way that things were figured out didn't match up with the possibility that it could happen at all. Of course, it was just a fundamental disaster, but it was just not dealt with analytically at all. Okay, so he has these terms: Meteorocristan versus Extremistan. So these are Gaussians. This is just to give you some more color. Extremistan is the power law, so it's mild versus wild. It's Mandelbrot's term for this. And I talked about the height versus wealth example. So the black swan, it's an okay thing. The thing is, the black swans are in Western Australia, and so until Europeans at least had arrived in Australia and did bad things, they were white swans, normally white swans, and so then you found a black swan. You didn't expect that. Okay. So this is, to sort of carry on with that, here's this little example. Here's a number of days. Here's the weight of a turkey. You can think of a tofurkey if you want. That's kind of boring. Adding a little bit of tofu over here. And its weight is going up. It's being a turkey. Everything is good. Then it is not a turkey. Right? So this is a very surprising day. So his point is, predicting the future based on the past in these kinds of systems leads to disaster, right? So years ago when I was at Columbia, we had him come and we talked for about 3 hours, and he had this story that because of the kind of quarterly reports that are imposed on many corporations, there's this tendency to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow and do sneaky things to make that happen. Excellent. Not excellent. Enron. That's an unfortunate thing. Excellent still. Enron, doing bad things, right? So they tend to grow, whereas, say, biotech industries, they kind of peter on, they're struggling, and then they get a big deal. So you have lots of little things they're trying, lots of failure, and then it takes off. The ones that are going up like this are the ones that tend to have a big explosion at some point. Right, so Meteorocristan and Extremistan, the most typical member is mediocre. You pull out a random person out of a Gaussian distribution, a random individual, or you get giant or tiny. So we'll get to this. The typical one for these power distributions could be either really very, very big, or you see lots of big ones, or you see many, many tiny ones. And that's a much more dangerous kind of distribution, because now and then you get the monster. So this is winner gets a small segment, winner takes almost all. Very important thing when you observe the Gaussian distributions for some time, you start to see it filling. It's good. We'll see this how if you sample from these parallel distributions, you're getting these samples out. It takes a very long time to see. You need many, many samples. And in fact, the typical size of the largest thing you've seen so far grows as the number of samples, and it grows in a non-trivial way. So that's bad. Prediction is easy, prediction is hard, history calls and history makes jumps. The tyranny of the collective, the tyranny of the rare and accidental. And I call it the statistics of surprise. So you'll see this as well, good things to know. These distributions are often called Pareto distributions. Pareto is a big deal in economics, and So Pareto was looking at wealth distributions in Italy at the end of the 19th century. That's right. Well, you get this 80-20 rule, which we'll come back to, but that's somewhat, it's misleading. It just really tells you the sort of, I mean, yeah, it's misleading. Practitioners of the dismal science. There you go. So economics, of course, was called the dismal science because it said bad things about the future of humanity. Right? But, you know, you could interpret it differently. Which I did for a while. Okay. All right, so there's some nasty little things. We'll do some calculations, and I guess I'll. Okay. Yeah, we're going to get there. So let's say we take it, we're going to say it's equal to this, and we'll say it's exactly a power law, and it's a continuous variable between some minimum and maximum. Fine, we'll just take that. So then the mean of this distribution, so we compute this. So the mean, and I'll use these little angle brackets because of some physics craziness in my head. That's what it means. Behaves like this. So it only depends on, so the gamma is in here, the exponent is in here. You guys can calculate this later. The gamma is in here, and the maximum in here. So there's a lack of internal scale being represented. And that's often what we talk about here, that internal scales don't matter. They sort of do collectively, but they don't. Nothing pops up. If we find the mean of a Gaussian, of course, there's a typical scale. You can point to it. There's a bump here. When you have these power laws, it's really just the maximum and the minimum. So it's these cutoff values that come into play. So what happens? So the mean will blow up with the upper cutoff, and it depends on gamma. So if gamma is less than 2, the mean will actually explode. Right? The mean size, so this is the giants being your average sample. So you're picking out, you've got this big bag of whatever it is, numbers, and you're selecting from them. And if the distribution of the sizes of things in this bag follows parallel with gamma smaller than 2, so that means it's a heavier tail, right? It's a wider, heavier tail, then you start to get many, many big things, and you start to see the average guy will be huge. It flips around. So if the lower cutoff is greater than 2, then these numbers flip, right? So this is going to be a negative value here, 2 minus something that's greater than 2. So this is going to be a relatively small term. This guy becomes the dominant piece. This sign flips so that the mean moves to the front. Right? So you can see there's a flip or 2 for the mean, just for the mean. So the variance has, for the variance it's 3. Gamma equals 3. So gamma smaller than 2, the typical sample is large. Right? You see large things on average. If it's greater than 2, the sample is small. Typical, your average guy is small. What are we doing with that? I want to give you a sign question. Right? So it's just sort of, what we're going to get to eventually is mechanisms that produce these kinds of distributions in all sorts of areas. And I'll give you the most sort of fundamental one, classical one, which has been rediscovered many times in all sorts of areas, actually. There's a great history to that. But you need to get a sense of how these things work. Okay. So all moments only depend on these cutoffs, the smallest and largest. So by moment, I mean the nth moment is the average size of x to the n. So it's statistic here. So n1 is equal to the average size of x equals the mean. So if you haven't had statistics, you have to expose yourself to these things. That's good. Statistical thinking is gigantically important. So there's no internal scale, as I said, that dominates or matters. That's absolutely different. It's a different case for Gaussians, exponentials. The internal scale is the story. Everything's built around some internal scale. For Gaussians, there are 2 parameters. There's a mean and variance, and everything else is governed by that. It's nothing about what happens up and down. Now, many real distributions, gamma is between 2 and 3, as I showed with some of those examples. There are some where gamma is less than 2, which is insane, as your average individual is large. Let me me just tell you, we'll come to this one later on. I just want to give you a little excited about it. I love it's one of my favorite things. It's just sort of good pedagogically, I think, but it's fun math. When I say fun, I mean it's horrible. Let's see. So imagine you have. So here's the inn. This is the pub, and we have this fellow walk outside who's drunk. None of you know about this, and they randomly walk left or right each time step. Okay? It's a classic pub. They randomly walk back and forth, so they're lurching all over the place. So the first time they can lurch this way and then lurch straight back. So there's half the time they come straight back to the top. But they're randomly wandering. So it turns out that the time to come back, if you look at it, so you let this character wander off over and over again. Set them off over and over again, randomly wandering around. And then you count up how much time, you look at how much time it takes to return. And you set them off again. You just let them wander around. And then you look at that distribution, it follows a parallel distribution again, parallel size distribution. And the exponent is actually less than 2, we'll find out exactly what it is, meaning that the average time it takes to return for this character is infinity. Probably their return is 1, average time is infinity. So it's very strange. So there's a very strange kind of thing. It's bad for you. You'll be very thirsty. All right, sorry to bring the tone of the thing down, but all right, so there's no strain in the room. I'm pandering to the crowd, but all right. But many real-world ones are between 2 and 3, so the mean is finite. The mean is finite. Most things are small. The variance is, in a sense, infinite. It depends on the largest size, right? Well, lots of big things. Possible. So the width of the distribution being infinite, even though when we plot on a linear scale, it still goes like this. It's a very strange thing. There's less disaster associated with ones where gamma is greater than 3, right? Because now the variance isn't so big. Variance is finite. The higher order moments are large, potentially large. It depends on this. And typically, we're into some other kind of distribution. If someone claims they have a gamma of 4, it's probably something else. Maybe an exponential or something. So, okay, another assignment question. I'll say this quickly, so we're running out of time. So the variance is a very nice thing to do with analytically. And in fact, that's many of the things we do by hand, we do because we didn't have computers. That's only really just changing some of the statistical work we're doing now. It's changing fundamentally because we have computational stuff. It's nice analytically, but a very reasonable thing to measure would be, well, so here's the mean position of something, and what's the average displacement from that? So here's the average height of a human person. What's the average, so if you then get a person, and you randomly select another person, what's the average they'll be away from, the expected distance they'll be away from that person, plus or minus. We work with the variance because it works beautifully, the standard deviation because it works beautifully with Gaussians in particular, and lots of other distributions you can solve it. But this thing is kind of nasty. Actually, so you see this, that even though between 2 and 3 the variance is infinite, this guy is actually finite. So this is really what you're trying to measure when you're measuring variance. Often you're trying to really get it that way. So it's MAD, the mean average deviation. But it's nasty analytically. But we still speak about an infinite width for these guys. And gamma is less than 4. Okay. I'll show you one last thing. I mentioned this before. So after n samples, this is another thing you guys can figure out, is that we expect it. So 1 here means what's the largest size. So you have n samples and you order them by their size. You're picking out of this bag of strange things. What's the largest one size? Typically. And you start to, as n gets larger, you see that it grows as n to the 1 over gamma minus 1. So if gamma is 2, which is that edge of badness between finite mean and infinite mean, you see 1 over 1. So it's growing like n, which is pretty bad. If it's at that other end of that regime, you have gamma equals 3, so it's growing like n². It's just a run, right? And if you have a Gaussian distribution, it's growing logarithmically, it's a real struggle. The big guy just never gets very big at all. So for example, here's an exponential distribution. The largest guy typically grows like logarithmic number of seconds, which is slower than any polynomial. All right, I think, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, I'll have to show you that stuff later on. The next thing is we'll talk about Zipf distributions, which is another way of doing this. What you do is you simply you rank cities or words by their size and look at that distribution. It's a different thing. It turns out they're nicely connected and different. Okay, so parallels, horrible things, very scary, and you must put them in your heads. Understand them. It's about understanding the world. It's great. Okay.